want to come back to that, but before we go there, I want to come back for a second to Fred Kaufman and victim versus player. Can you explain what this is?
I love this one because I think it's so simplifying and clarifying, really about are you managing someone or interacting with someone who has agency, takes responsibility? And Fred, when he introduces this framework, tells the story of how young children, and I think he has six or seven children, by the way, but how young children, when something has happened that they know is bad, will not take responsibility. So they will say things like, the coat is at school. So not I left my coat at school, right? Or the
A thing
toy
has happened. Things
the
have
toy
happened.
is broken. You're like, "Well, did you break it?" So he has this really disarming way of introducing this concept, which is we're all laughing just like you and I. We're like,
Yeah.
"Ha the toy is broken." But then he's like, "Okay, now let's talk about you couldn't if one of your direct reports came to you and said the report was not written."
Yeah.
And you're like, "The report that you were meant to write?" You know, But how it actually manifests is, I mean, yeah, here, like you're supposed to write some report up or some summary of a meeting, right? And you say, "Oh, tell me where that is." And the player says, "Completely my fault. I had planned to get it to you by 5 o'clock yesterday. I prioritized this emergency that came up, didn't tell you, my bad. Can we renegotiate? Like, can I get it to you at 5 o'clock today?" And you're like, "Fine. I wish you'd told me that you weren't going to get it, but like, the victim says, let me tell you about that report. Lucy owes me her notes and I can't finish it without Lucy. And Lucy, is super slow at getting her notes. And I'm sorry, like I don't know when I'm going to get it.
Mhm.
But that actually is pretty common. People are like, well, it's this
Super
other
common.
person that I'm
Mhm.
depending on. And therefore I have no responsibility. And they're a victim and they're going to play the victim. And I think that's a very hard person to coach.
How much do you have to select that in your hiring process versus coach people from one side to the other? Have you had much success or seen much success in moving people from the victim side to the player side? And that's a bit of a leading question by my tone, I guess. I suspect there are a lot of instances where that's hard, but in the success cases, what does that coaching process look like?
I've seen both. Like, I feel like with people who are earlier in their career, they're more, I mean, I'm all growth mindset, but they're a little more moldable and you can actually coach people out of this as like a way of operating. If they're later in their career, it's a little more ingrained and it's quite hard, especially because they tend to not be aware of it because they've somehow been successful operating in that mode. And so they're kind of like, what are you saying? You see leaders and you know how they behave, Tim, is they say, well, if it's not under my direct control, then I am not responsible.
Hmm.
And so they become empire builders. And some
Hmm.
organizations let them get away with it. They're like, sure, you can have all the infrastructure teams then. And then I'll hold you account. Like it becomes this weird failing upward problem
I see.
where people say, well, if I can control it, I'll take responsibility.
If it's within my house, then I'll take responsibility. So
Yes,
people satisfy that checkbox by giving them more and more resources. What a nightmare.
exactly. And it becomes this weird expanded scope of this person who actually doesn't take responsibility. It's a pattern I've seen. For people earlier in their career, the easiest coaching move you do, which I'm sure you've heard or someone's done it to you, I've certainly had it done to me. You say to them, they're saying, Lucy didn't send me her notes. And you're saying, what could you have done differently?
Hmm.
And you have to let uncomfortable silence then. And some people will then, well, say, what do you mean? Like you're like, oh my gosh. But some people will say, well, I guess I could have helped Lucy write the notes. So what I try to do is stay in the discomfort, which is hard, and just sort of like, let's list out a few things you could have done differently.
Hmm.
And not be judgmental, like not judge the things. Just say what it was. So you could have helped Lucy write the notes. You could have set a deadline with her that was ahead
I
of
was
your
just going to
deadline.
say, right. Put a deadline in Asana where people can actually see it.
You could use a productivity tool where you could
Hmm.
see. I love those tools because that's sunshine. Sunshine is a great disinfectant, Tim. Like if everybody can see that Lucy has not done her action item, that is going to help Lucy be more accountable. But the point is, you come up with this list, and the person often is like, wow, you're right. Like, really, what they're going to have to admit to you is they're being a little lazy. Like, they're not
Hmm.
helping others do the work. They're not a good collaborator. And so you sort of say, and that's what I sometimes do with someone is like, if this is a pattern, I say, I see this pattern. Do you see this pattern where you're waiting for other people all the time? Tell me more about why you think that's happening. Why are people not delivering for you? And the question is like, either it's because they haven't figured out how to do action items or accountability or be clear about deadlines, or there's someone people don't like to work with,
Mm.
right? And so you're kind of going, I always call it like going meta. Like you're looking from the balcony at the situation, which is a term from adaptive leadership. Are you on the balcony or are you on the dance floor? And if you're on the balcony, you try to get the person up there with you. Say, why do you have this pattern of people not helping you get your work done? And then I think of it as going to the basement. I know I'm a very visual person. I'm like, so we look down and they sort of, if they acknowledge it, they say, yeah, I guess I see that. And I say, well, let's talk about a few examples. And we come up with some examples. And then we go down and we're in the scenario. And I say, let's do the 5 whys. I mean, everyone loves the 5 whys. I'm like, why do you think Lucy didn't send you the notes? Well, she's not good at deadlines. Okay, be that. And then this is a wonderful expression that I learned from some coach I had a million years ago. Be that as it may, which is not normal English language, but I don't know, it worked. Sort of like, be that as it may. Okay, maybe Lucy's terrible at deadlines, but why else? Like well, I didn't ask her to get it to me at a specific time. Okay, so maybe there's a thing. Why else? And you're sort of pushing them. And sometimes, not every time, they'll sort of say, well, I don't know, Lucy and I don't work that well together.
Aha.
And you're like, oh, say more about that. What do you think's going on? And of course, by the way, your left hand column, Tim, is it's because Lucy doesn't like you
Mhm.
because you blame her for all of your missed deadlines, right? But I can't say that because that person is going to go from learning, barely in learning mode. I'm trying to bring them along with me and they're going to just shut down. So you got to
Mhm.
sort of, and by the way, they may never admit that Lucy doesn't like them because they blame her for missed deadlines. But they're going to realize that their manager, who's me, is not letting them off the hook.
Mhm.
If they can't get into an agency, a player mindset, I'm a responsible party for my work and others, then they are going to be off my team. If I can't coach them out of it, to your point, there's two gaps that I think are really hard. One is people who can't stop being victims. And the other gap is I call it self-awareness gap, where they think they are the best in the world. Like I once worked with this BD person who was like, I can negotiate a deal better than anyone. And first of all, like talk about not being in a learning mindset. I'm like, wait, do you not think we should get any outside advice? Like, do you not? But I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but
Sure.
really unaware that they had any potential blind spot
Mhm.
or had never done a deal like this deal or like and I'm like, how are we going to close this awareness gap because the people around you are saying you are not the best person to negotiate this deal, and I'm trying to hand it to someone else and you're like, what, you have no one better than me, and like that's a very hard gap to close.
Yeah, totally.